Hello, everyone. We are Diagnose. So when I was a medical student, I had the pleasure of treating Mrs. K, who came in because she'd started developing shortness of breath or difficulty breathing. As a very astute medical student, I knew that there was a perfect tool for this. It was called the Well score, which is a clinical tool used to help stratify a risk for developing what's called a PE, or a blood clot in the lungs that's potentially fatal. Now, when I did the test on her, because her heart rate was only 98 and because she had only been in the hospital for 2 days, she had a well score of 0. Confidently, I walked to my attending and say, Ms. K only has a well score of 0. She doesn't need to get a CT. My attending told me to get it anyway. Within an hour, we found a submassive PE and were able to treat immediately. The next day, Ms. K effusively thanked me for saving her life. But in my mind, I knew that if it weren't for the insight of my attending, that if we're left to just the judgment of me and the well score, that Ms. K would have died. Now, the well score is very commonly used. But the issue is it was developed in 2001 with a sample size of only 1,000. Since then, it's been used to evaluate 50 million patients and has missed about 500,000 PEs. And that's the fundamental problem with medicine today, that we only update our knowledge about every 20 years because it takes a $10 million clinical trial to update that. That's 20 years where medicine stays stagnant and 20 years of patients dying. That's why a lot of physicians consider diagnosis an art rather than a science. And that's where Diagnose comes in. The Diagnose is an AI-powered smart calculator to enable better clinical decision making. I want to be clear, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. There have been billions of dollars spent on these clinically validated tools to help, like the Well score, to help diagnose patients. But the problem is that they're all stagnant. Diagnose evolves over time because it collects patient data and it collects data from physicians. Diagnose evolves by doing a variable Bayesian analysis using logistic regression to improve its score and improve accuracy over time. But let me show rather than tell. So, as I mentioned, even though we've only talked about the Well score, there are dozens of different clinical tests that are used to help screen patients, covering hundreds of millions of different patients. One of the fundamental things that we do is we extract data from the EHR and automatically fill in data, so that saves a huge pain point for a lot of clinicians. On the back end, we're using much more sophisticated data analytics to compile this data and create a much more sophisticated and much more accurate diagnosis. And on the front end, physicians only need about 10 seconds and a few swipes to get fast and accurate information, allowing them to use their time for more complex medical decisions. And then finally, at the end of the day, this is where the machine learning comes in. Physicians input the results for the patients, training the model itself and allowing for better diagnoses. So thank you very much, and we hope.
I like the basic concept of updating models based on local information. I think, to me, the only weak point in this system is that getting those labels to use for your model update is dependent on physician feedback, and that might be hard to incentivize. I'd like to hear about how you're going to address that.
Yeah, and so it's definitely going to be a staged model in which in the beginning we're going to be partnering with specific physicians who are basically joining us in this essentially kind of a trial or research study where they're actively putting in the data because they want to be part of this kind of research study. And in addition, we can partner with the NIH or kind of American Heart Association and other associations to get grants to kind of fund this research.
And also, if we have ways to partner with NIH and also those EMH systems, we can extract the information automatically just based on patient charts.
But from the patient point of view, the patient would benefit the most if you have the most number of their doctors using your app.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And so the idea is that, because there are so many tests covered, that ultimately all physicians can find some way to use this. But we'll probably start with emergency medicine doctors first because they're the ones using most of these tests and most often.
How many different diagnostic channels or tests are there, and could you focus on 1, 2, or 3 to sort of validate it?
Definitely. And so Here we've identified 7 very commonly used tests, and they're kind of annual patient populations. And these are tests that we consider relatively low-hanging fruit in that the variables that they currently use are pretty rudimentary, and we can update them very easily, but also they have clinical outcomes that can be improved.